Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Truthseeker's Path. Today we have Adam Garrie. I'm very honored to have him here. He's been on my Facebook feed. I know he's a big part of the Alternative News Network. He has a story. He's a real human being. And you and I both, all of us, we're going to find out a little bit more about Adam. Adam, welcome.
Thank you. It's very good to be here.
Well, thanks for taking the time out. You're in London right now. I'm in New Zealand. I guess I'm entering into the winter season. You're entering into, has spring arrived yet?
Yes and no. It's arrived less so than the missile strikes in Syria, but it might last a bit longer. Hopefully anyway.
Yes, indeed. I think what I want to do here, Adam, is just get as much information as I can. There are a lot of people out there, myself included, that have been awake for some time, have been reading and posting back and forth, and have been frustrated at the lack of, well, the growth has been strong in the Alternative News Network. Let's face it, mainstream news is suspect. Even the most die-hard believers in official government stories in the West have been questioning some of the crazy things that the mainstream news has been promoting erroneously over and over through all these wars. And I like to pick on the wars because it's the easiest globalist agenda item to pick on. And it's the worst human crime as well. So we got those two serious aspects to it, I suppose. And I'm wondering what I can do to up my game. There are other people in the community that are wondering the same thing. On behalf of all of us, welcome here, Adam. The floor is yours. I want to try to understand what I can about where you came from, where you grew up, what sort of, and lead into the area where you had your wake up. We all had something called wake up, and different things. We name it different things. It encompasses, means different things to different people. But you have your own description of that. I'm interested to know what that is, and we'll get into some of the things that you've done as well, currently and in your past, and some challenges and great victories that you've had as well. But if we could start with maybe just the beginning, where did you grow up? What influenced you in your life, and how did you get to that wake up area?
Right. So in the beginning, a very good place to start. So I was born in San Diego in the United States and spent my earliest years around there. And the first thing that I was sort of into, as a voluntary thing, and also because I came from a musical family, was music. So all sorts, classical, jazz. I loved and still love prog rock. The older, my grandfather, not so much that. He was more on the classical and jazz side, but it was very, I was never told, you must listen to this and you must not listen to that. You know, God help me. It's bad enough when governments do that, let alone some families, especially with those generational things going on. But it was so that was fine. That was cool. I learned how to handle the musical instruments. I was a percussionist. I learned how to handle the tapes. These were the reel-to-reels, the quarter-inch that you'd have to thread and do the loop-de-loo and all that. And of course, your records, which you have to do the anti-static brush and all that. So that was my first love, and it's a current love, even though I'm not involved in that professionally anymore, even though I was. I think I went to school in my early days, fairly ordinary, nothing special. I was not very good at mathematics. I was decent at the, I suppose, I don't even know what they called it then, but the humanities end of things. I was okay at that. But when it comes to the awakening, as you call it, I suppose it all goes back, and I know this might sound a bit like Dr. Freud on the old sofa, but it goes back, you know, to tell me your childhood memory is the terrible Austrian voice. And it was a combination of two things that, let me just turn this off. I had that on the television earlier too. It really comes down to two things. On the one hand, I disliked what I considered unethical authority in school. So I thought the teachers were basically, they weren't training you to think, and they weren't training you to experience life. They were training you to sit in those horrible, uncomfortable chairs, to not chew gum and all of this. At the same time, I didn't like anarchy. I thought that the world could function where, yes, there is order, yes, there is discipline, but it's based on ethics, and it's based on the least restrictive way to contain the individual, but while avoiding the rules of the jungle. Balance is possible. A few months after that awakening, I realized that some of my teachers were really stupid. And that wasn't to say that I was particularly clever or that the kids around me were particularly unusual. No, I wasn't, they weren't. But in the schooling systems in Western countries, in just your ordinary state-run public school, the American term, state school, the English, and I think maybe Australian, South African, New Zealand term. But when the government's paying the teachers, it's a bit like a conscripted army. They're there because they frankly don't have anything else to do. And Roger Waters, who was a childhood hero of mine, who's once again entered into my consciousness now that he's a pro-Palestine activist, he wrote in the 1983 Pink Floyd album, The Final Cut, and I'll try to quote the line of the lyric, the poetry exactly. If you're one of the few who land on your feet, what do you do to make ends meet? Teach. Make them laugh, make them cry, make them lay down and die. And so I definitely felt that there was, even though he was talking about his childhood and the teachers that came back from the First and Second World Wars, and they didn't know what to do with their lives. The government didn't prepare the veterans for, let's call it, assimilation into civilian life. But even me, long after the Second World War, but in, let's say, the Vietnam generation in my American schooling, there was still this pervasive attitude. You come back from a war like the Vietnam War, and if you're not on so many drugs that, mind you, the government gave the soldiers during the war in order to try to increase their adrenaline, and it only made them psychopaths when they came to civilian life, you either became a police officer whose main goal was to either harass people driving too fast or to beat people for having skin that was too black, or otherwise to teach in schools where if you were allowed to beat the kids, which at some of them you could, great, well done, you know, close your eyes and think of Saigon. And if you weren't allowed to beat them, you had to up your game, but only a bit more into the psychological war category and make the kids' life hell in that sense. So that's where it all started. It started with this dichotomy in me thinking the world could be ethical and ordered, but it doesn't need to be so arbitrarily violent and in a way which quashes intellectual exploration and healthy creativity. I think when I was growing up, creativity might have meant something more positive then than it does now. It meant learning an instrument, writing a poem, learning to paint. Now I suppose it means dressing oddly and wanting to be recognized for it. So I'm using the old school definition of creativity, if we can put it that way. Beyond that, my grandfather, who was an incredibly wise man, and that doesn't even do him justice, he would be reading history books, reading the papers, which there was no alt media in that day, but as needs must, even with the mainstream media of its day, you could sort of read between the lines. And it was a technique that he and I, and I'm sure you and everyone before this age of alt media who was curious, needed to develop. So if one MSM outlet is saying A and the other is saying something B, the truth must be C minus the kind of biases that are inherent in both. And then after that proverbial equal sign, you get something kind of sort of approximating the truth. The other thing I learned early on is to try to find the facts. It's very hard to lie about an overt fact. At least it was then. They've got better at it now. But if someone said X amount of soldiers were in this battlefield, this side declared victory, this side ended up going into a truce, it's hard to lie about that. These are public facts. It's not whistleblowing. It's not speculation. And so if you can tease that out, even in analysis, you can gain information even from analysis that you know is untrue. So fast forward a bit, and then we see the beginnings of alt media. I think alt media is sort of an international thing. I think the US talk shows that became so big in the 1990s, incredibly partisan, all for the Republican Party. You had the ones like Rush Limbaugh, who began as sort of cutting edge because it was when talk radio became deregulated, and he's become a self-parody since, I like Bush because of freedom and democracy. Look at these cigars. The only people who should be allowed to vote are the people that smoke cigars. Otherwise, just make them do something else on polling. So he's a parody. But the idea that, okay, here's a very old format from a technical point of view, AM radio, but it's become deregulated. And then the internet came and everything changed. When the internet first came along, I wasn't that impressed for the simple reason that when a new model of a car comes out, you never want to buy it in the first year. You want to wait till all the little problems get resolved. So it's the other stupid guy who needs to have the first model of the, I don't know, E-Class or whatever car you like. And then once he's at the mechanic screaming and his friends at the mechanic screaming, it goes back to the corporate headquarters. They say, okay, for the next year, we're going to make sure that the engine's actually connected to all four wheels rather than just three. And then you can buy it. So I took a similar attitude to the internet. At first, I thought, okay, this is slow, this is boring. I'm sure many of you remember the ka-ching, ka-ching, kong, 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 the 56K, they called it. It was horrible. I can buy a newspaper by putting a coin in a little thing and going like this. Why do I need the cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo? Then, of course, the internet opened up and it became fast. It became user-friendly to someone who wasn't so technical. And on that, you saw people that were the same guys who were always talking. They were the guys in the coffee shops, in the bars, in the bookstores, in the record stores, in the parks. These people who sought the truth, researched the truth, and could articulate the truth in a very effective way. They always exist. The internet didn't invent them, but the internet gave them a big voice, and it allowed you, meaning anyone in the world, to seek them out with at the touch of your fingertips. So I thought that was very interesting. And so I'd always been political. Everyone had always said that I've got strong opinions. They liked how I could articulate them. And one thing led to another. I was sort of, let's say, between jobs, and I submitted an article to a news website. They published it. Then I took a job with them. Then I decided to start my own outlet. Just a few months ago, I started this current one, EurasiaFuture.com. And from then on, that's sort of the nutshell version of birth as a musician to someone who now focuses his professional and, I suppose, personal energies on news analysis on my website, television, places like this.
That's fantastic, Adam. Great summary. And I love that English humor. I grew up with Monty Python and Benny Hinn. You may cringe when you hear that, but I love
it. They're the best. Nothing's been better since.
Yeah, I agree. And I just looked up your name next to Eurasia Future as a keyword search. There's 28,900 results on Google just right now with that general search. So well done on a new effort. Obviously, you're picking up the pace from a history of efforts. Wondering if you could talk about some of your successes and challenges along the way, because you've got a few of them. Some of them are more public probably than others. Keeping in mind there are people that perhaps wonder what it's like to walk down the journey that you've gone through. Maybe you've had some surprises. I guess one of the typical things that every truther shares is like, well, the more I talk about it, I find some friends don't want to talk to me anymore, and new friends come along. That's just maybe a superficial example, but you'll have some challenges and victories along the way. I think a lot of people would like to hear that.
I think experience too, I suppose, I hate the term, but give this. Don't set out to change people's minds. Set out to explore your mind in a public forum and to put things out there. Anyone else who wants an argument, you can't win an argument with in their eyes. They'll go away with their original beliefs thinking they won, and you'll be thinking the exact same thing. This is a business, much the way the music industry is like a business. And again, a Pink Floyd reference. Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd was once interviewed at a stage so shortly after they started doing these big stadiums. And he said that you're naive as an artist, as a musician, to go in thinking that all 70 in this football stadium are part of your fan club who know all the chords to your songs, all the words, know what shirt you were wearing on this album cover or that one. No, maybe 20% or less of that audience is the fan club, and the rest of the people are there because, oh, my friend has a Pink Floyd record that he's listened to one side of, my friend of a friend has a Pink Floyd t-shirt, I don't know, I was bored and the poster looked good and someone gave me a discounted ticket. And you have to accept that. So the true believers that really like your stuff will tend to stick with you. And those who always hate you and always disagree with you always will. That's fine. It's a marketplace of ideas. This isn't the MSM Gestapo. And let's hope it never becomes that way. The people that this industry is designed for are, and I hate to quote old Tricky Dick, but it's the silent majority. It's the people that don't necessarily interact with every Facebook or Twitter post. Maybe they don't interact at all. It's the people whose names you might never actually know, but they're reading your stuff and they find it interesting. Maybe they read it once a week. Maybe they read it twice a week. Maybe if they get into it, they read it every day in the way that someone reads a morning paper. It may not change their life, but it will probably change their mind. It's these open-minded people in the silent majority that this is aimed for, because you might not know their names, like the members of the fan club, the fanatics, the true believer, but these are the people who their eyes are open. They might be watching CNN in the morning. They might be reading someone's website like Eurasia Future in the afternoon. They might be watching one of your interviews in the evening. And for them, it isn't a blood sport. It isn't a competition. These are just all sources that they enjoy, or that they find interesting, or that they feel partly, maybe unconsciously, obliged to engage with. And these are the people whose minds can be changed. And I believe that in great respects, they have been changed, because the biggest difference between the mainstream media and the so-called alternative media is that in mainstream media, you maybe have 10 people, a committee that has to decide what the news is before the person with just a bit too much makeup and a bit too much plastic surgery reads it out. And alt media, you have very much fewer people that go into the actual content, forgetting the fact that people have web designers and some have people to help with social media and the rest of it. In terms of the actual content, I would say the majority of it, certainly on the independently owned outlets, as opposed to state-owned or the semi-corporate ones, it's just one guy or one girl. It's just one person who says, these are my views, I'm going to put them into the microphone or put them into the computer keyboard and type them out, put them into the camera, and that's it. It's not news by committee. And people ultimately respect that authenticity. It's, to use another reference, in the 1990s, Nirvana came around and they were very popular. At the time, I wasn't so much of a fan, but the thing is, in the 80s, you had all this so much production technique. You couldn't put a record out without gating the drums, without putting all this digital reverb on the guitars, without 10 different digital synthesizers that were then manipulated by Trevor Horn's mixing console to sound in a different way than they even do out of the box. And then these guys from Seattle with an out semi-tuned guitar, little drum kit, and a bass, they said, we're just going to play loudly and talk about the things you want. And people responded to it, even if the music might have been a bit rough around the edges, which, to be fair, it was, and they admitted it. People thought this other stuff is too produced. And that's what's happening with MSM. It's not so much that people read it and they instinctively know that it's 90 to 100% lies. They just see this is too polished. If it's okay for Andrew Lloyd Webber to be polished when he has the Phantom of the Opera and Cats and all that, it's okay for Pink Floyd to have a laser show. But when it comes to the news, all you really need is someone who can speak in at least one language and speak clearly and state coherent facts. You don't need the rest of it. And so I think it's that visceral reason that's turning people on to the alternative media. And then from there, they can see, okay, this guy's a liar, this guy's intelligent, this guy I disagree with, but he's well informed, this guy's a conspiracy theorist lunatic, but at least he's entertaining. And they have all these things, and they make the informed consumer decisions from there.
I think your background allows you to make it an entertainment, and you obviously enjoy what you do, Adam. That must be a big part of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't think I'd be capable of doing this if I didn't have musical training, because anything that involves public, I know it's like a dirty word, but acting, there's nothing more unnatural than speaking into a microphone and a camera in a studio where no one is there. Because whether it's on Skype like this, which is a bit more natural because it's in a home or an office, but when someone's in these television studios, you're in a room that's like a black box. If it has air conditioning, you're a lucky guy. If it doesn't have air conditioning, you're a not so lucky guy. You sit in the chair, you have a nice young man put a microphone here and an earpiece there, and you just stare into the camera. Now, what could be more unnatural than that? You need to have some ability in terms of performance stamina in order to handle it, in the same way that a studio musician needs to get used to, let's say, playing alone in a room with the other musicians only on the headphones, because that's how most pop music's been recorded for the last 45 plus years in some cases. And in the same way that when you're on a stage, you need to get used to doing the total opposite, to not let the crowd psych you out if they're booing and hissing, but at the same time not to let them give you too much of an emotional high if they just yeah and think you can just coast along just because they're going to cheer you no matter what, because the beer is cheap and the girls are pretty and whatever else happens to be going on. The news business is the same thing, and that's not to say that it's not about truth. It is. When you're up there playing your guitar, you have to play the note you wanted to play. That's the truth. A mistake is a lie, not an intentional lie, but nevertheless, it's an untruth from what you wanted to do. And the same thing here. This is a business of promoting the truth as I see it, as you see it, as everyone else sees it. And certain facts are indisputable. Well, for most people, there's always the conspiracy theorists. Bless them. I cherish their free speech as much as mine. But there's generally certain facts that we all agree are true. But beyond that, it's largely interpretive and it's subjective. And that's why my advice is don't idol worship. Don't listen to only one person. Listen to all people and don't be afraid to change your mind as the facts change. And that, to me, is a healthy media environment. Alt media has a bit of growing up to do in that sense, but at least there's hope. MSM, you can just throw out the window like yesterday's rotten milk. It's hopeless. Old media has its problems, but the point is, because it's a growing industry, it's a growing phenomenon. For some people, it's about activism, and may God be with them on that too. There's hope, and who knows? Maybe someday this will become as stagnant as the Rush Limbaughs, as the Katie Couric's, as the Anderson Coopers. Maybe it will be, but for now it isn't. And when that happens, the people that want to become establishment after being radical will sit back and trade the cigarette for the cigar, the cheap clothes for the expensive clothes, and then the others who want to pursue things that are still interesting will find some new thing to go into. God knows what it will be after the internet, maybe some sort of 3D truth serum taking thing. Who knows what the future holds.
Adam, I hear your mobile phone going off, and I
Is
know
it still? I thought I turned it off. You see, I'm not the technology man.
No,
I thought I turned it off. But let me try pressing the off button again.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's just the buzzer. But I see that you're a very busy guy, and I do appreciate your time here. I think you covered this really well with humor, with intelligence, with perspective, and showing the back and forth between the music industry and the alternative news. It was brilliant, and that's where that's where you're familiar with. Great lessons for people getting themselves into this. How about some of your personal? I mean, if you have a few more minutes, I'm just wondering. I guess to round this out, if you could tell us where you're at now, and maybe a few of your challenges and victories, and how can people find you? So I see that the Eurasia, you're all over the internet, but you've got some sites that probably you want to direct people to. I've got you on Facebook. The what did you call it? Eurasia
Future is my fairly new but growing, and I think the reception's been great overall. It's Eurasia Future, all one word, .com. It's most of the articles are by me, but obviously I want to expand to a multi-author format. I have very frequent contributions though by Andrew Caribko, the great and legendary Andrew Caribko, who hosts a weekly show, 2 weekly shows actually on Sputnik. There's Trendstorm and there's Context Countdown. So he's great. I've got other people who write, including Netka Babliku, who's got her own video channel where she hosts a multitude of shows, and she's working on some other projects focusing on the Middle East and the Arab world in particular, and it's just going to expand over time. But right now, it's a full-time job getting everything out there. But thus far, the reception's been great, and because I'm in charge, I can say what I generally want, which is always a nice thing to do.
That's fantastic, and yeah, I agree with your assessment on Andrew Caribko, and I'm sure you've already made great progress at Eurasia Future by the looks of the hits over there. You've done quite a lot as well. I've seen you on RT. I've seen you defending the rights of one of their reporters last year, I think it was, that was rounded up in a kettle fashion by the police. And I'm sure you've been involved in a number of other things as well. What?
Not with the police, I have to say.
Not the police, not directly.
At least not yet, no.
Let's keep it that way.
Yeah.
Any suggestions you can have for people that come up against libel or slander or things like that, where people come at you viciously, maybe with an agenda? Well, it's always going to be an agenda these days. If they come at it, someone who's telling the truth, there's only one reason for that. They're defending an unsubstantial position based on lies, and we've got plenty of that going around. The incentives to make war, I'm so surprised that so many people jump on that bandwagon, but they're starting to all look the same to me over time. And the people telling the truth, although they're very different, are starting to sort of, the essence of what they're trying to do is the same. They all have different ways of doing it and different things I agree and disagree with, but the effort is there, and that becomes visible when you pay attention.
Absolutely. I would say, first of all, it's legal to insult people, and God bless that reality. I mean, a lot of people want to change that. I think the best thing about the United States is the First Amendment. And a lot of other countries have adopted things similar, but what's good about the First Amendment is it segregates words from actions, because words aren't actions. Words are harmless. Words can make you think, but only in a psychopath. And in spite of what we might see on MSM, that's a small minority of the average public. Only amongst the psychopaths do words lead to violent action. So if people are going to insult you, if you put yourself out in public, if you don't want to experience that, go into a different line of work, or use a pseudonym, as some do, but eventually they'll find you out, maybe. So that's the first thing. You can insult back, by the way, which if you're good at it can be fun. So if you like that sort of thing, it's the place for you. If not, there's always other things available. The other thing, though, is know your rights. And while there is free speech, people cannot say you work for someone that you don't. They cannot quote you and say that you said something that you did not say. And they cannot say that you did something specific that you did not do. For example, I'm raising money to take a legal action against the Washington Examiner newspaper, who, in an article that is written about on my webpage, they accuse me of something which can only be reasonably interpreted as working for a government, in this case, the Russian government. Now, I've never worked for any government at any level, not the Russian government, not the Maltese government, not the American government, not the Mongolian government. Maybe someday I'll start my own government, and I don't know if that would be working for a government or self-employed. I haven't looked up that that aspect of it. But they printed an entry. Now, the article is full of insults by a writer who's far less creative than me and people I read, so clearly he's clutching at straws, but that's fine. I encourage him to work on his insults and improve it. I could even put him in touch directly with people who are much better at insulting me than he is. But he cannot tell the public that I worked for an entity which I've never worked for, not in the past, not at the present. I'm 99.9% sure not in the future. So I'm trying to clear my name in that respect. And right now I'm at the fundraising stage. To do that on Eurasia Future, there's a little button that says donate. And if you have a little plastic thing with numbers on it, a credit card or a PayPal account, either one, people can contribute as much or as little as they want. And so far, people have been great in terms of both small and large contributions. And we'll see where it goes. It's more about clearing my name than about the compensation, though that's important as well. And so we'll see where it goes. I've reached out to them and they haven't written me back, so I've had no choice but to do this.
Well, on that note, maybe we'll just finish on a positive note and say that your impact has been felt. You're mixing with great people. You've got a great momentum behind you. I think your sense of humor is fantastic, and it's used in large doses, which is beautiful. Even when you bring up subjects that can be considered distasteful to a lot of people. So I think a lot of that energy will rub off on people, and a lot of people are going to identify with you. And the purpose here really is just to get to know you. I think we've done that. Thanks for sharing. Adam, is there anything else that you'd like? I mean, people should tune in to EurasiaFuture.com if they've got the extra cash to help you with that libel suit and thumb their nose at Big Brother or at mainstream media, whichever the case might be. You're offering that opportunity. I think that's a fun way to make a difference. And there's many other ways that people can make a difference. I guess following their own strengths and understanding what those strengths are might be a first part. Discernment will find people to the truth. You've outlined that. That's sort of coming from your grandfather. So a lot of people have grandfathers. A lot of people have music abilities. A lot of people will be able to identify that. Thank you very much, sir, for being on Truth Seeker's path.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Take care, Adam. Bye-bye.
Take care. Take care. It's been great. Take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.